no idea.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, sure.
You ready? Okay. So we are going to make tomato sauce. Classic, simple tomato sauce. And this is a vegetarian sauce. It's the sauce that we make at the Meatball Shop. It's our most popular sauce. And if you follow these instructions, your sauce will be very, very delicious. I think the most important thing to think about whenever you're making a simple recipe, whenever you're cooking, ingredients are extremely important. But the simpler the recipe, the more important the quality of the individual ingredients become. Because if you think about that, the less stuff you're putting in, the more important the individual components, each individual component becomes, so that it shines through. So especially with something like sauce that's going to be cooked down, all of the flavors that you add are going to be magnified, and you want to make sure that everything is top quality. For this recipe, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ingredients, and when it's done, hopefully it'll have a really full, complicated, nuanced, delicious tomato sauce flavor. First and foremost, I've got 1 large yellow onion. I'm actually not going to use this whole onion. This is a really large onion. I'm going to use about half of it. So I'm just going to go ahead and dice it. Now, how finely I dice it has a lot to do with whether I want to have chunks in the end. So if I cut it a little bigger, maybe I'll have some chunks in the end. For this particular sauce, I'm happy to have the onions just kind of melt away. So I'm just going to make this medium dice. And then the little bolster piece I'm going to leave. I'm going to pop that right into my pot. I've got a heavy bottomed sauce pot, which is very important because I don't want it to burn. Burnt sauce is like the pits. I'm going to put it on a medium heat. The big misconception with olive oil is like the most expensive olive oil is the best. The most expensive olive oil is not the best. It's like metal, right? Like gold is the best because it's the most expensive. It's the best for jewelry, maybe. Like you definitely don't want to buy someone like a copper bracelet and be like, "Hey, honey, I love you." But it's not the best for making a hammer out of. If you made a hammer out of gold, it would be just terrible. It wouldn't work at all. So it would be awesome, actually. I would love it if someone made a golden hammer. I want one so bad. Olive oil is very similar. So when you're cooking, you want to use a light olive oil, something that doesn't have a very, very strong flavor, because that strong flavor you don't want it. We're making tomato sauce, or we're not making olive oil sauce. The olive oil is a really important component. It's the only fat we're going to add to the sauce, so it's going to add a lot of flavor and texture in the end, which you'll see. So I throw the onions in, and then I'm going to be healthy with the olive oil. When I'm putting olive oil in, the olive oil is a component of the sauce that I care about. Olive oil does 2 super important things. Fat is what translates flavor. So your tongue is like these bumps of what do they call those, taste buds? And the olive oil, it coats your tongue and it allows the flavor to transfer through. You could do the test where you make a soup, like a cauliflower soup or something, with just puree cauliflower and water together after it's cooked, onions, and taste it, and it has very little cauliflower flavor. Then add like heavy cream to it, and then taste it, and it's like, oh my god, it pops with cauliflower flavor. That's because the fat is what actually is transmitting the flavor into your tongue. When it comes to cooking, the pot is the same as your tongue. It's this metal surface, and very little touches it. So if you put an onion just on the metal surface, it'll have little burnt pieces and then little raw pieces. The olive oil is what allows it to kind of cook super evenly and distribute the heat so that all of it cooks together. So I'm going to go generous with the olive oil. A lot of people like burnt garlic. I definitely do not like burnt garlic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add the onions first. The moisture from the onions are going to keep the garlic from burning. Now, if you wanted to toast the garlic first, what I do is I'll put the garlic in with the olive oil. I'll let the flavor kind of come, and right before it starts to get any color or brown, I'll throw the onions in, and that'll slow it down and stop it. But in this case, I'm just going to crush it Give it a little chop. And throw it right in. Bay leaf, 1 bay leaf right in the pot. I've got some oregano. I'm going to take maybe 2 or 3 branches of oregano, fresh oregano, put them right in. I'm going to put a little pinch of chili flakes. Chili flakes are this is really important. So there are some spices and some herbs that are water soluble, and there are some spices and herbs that are fat soluble. Chili is a fat soluble product. Because of that, you want to be very careful with chili flakes and any spice whenever you add it. I always start with a really minimal amount. I'm just going to throw a little pinch in there because I can always add more later, but you can never take that spice away. And sometimes it'll take 4 to 5 minutes for the spice to really distribute through it. So like I'll be finishing my sauce, I put a pinch, I mix it, I taste it, I'm like, that's not spicy, I put another pinch. I'm like, that's not spicy, I put another pinch. 5 minutes later, it's like way too spicy to eat. So put a pinch, give it some time. Let's think about it. We can always add more later. Another piece of the puzzle, like garlic, chili burns. All kinds of pepper burns, and then it leaves a really bitter, interesting off taste, which they use in some dishes. Not going to use it here, so I'm using the chili later on. If I don't want something to get color, I'll add the salt early when I'm cooking onions. If I want to get color on my onions, I'll add no salt, hot flame, oil, throw the onions in, cook it, don't add any salt until they've got their color. If I want to make sure that it doesn't get any color, I'll go ahead and I'll add the salt early because the salt will actually draw the moisture out of the onions, which will help it to boil. You could hear it, it starts crackling. That's that water coming out of the onions, boiling on this bottom of the pan and stopping the onions from getting any color. So I'm cooking this for like 15 minutes, and I'm noticing that some color is starting to happen on the bottom of my pan. I'm not worried about that at all. When I add my tomatoes, that's all going to come off. Like brown color, this fronde they call it, I guess in French people, is the sugar from the onion starting to caramelize on the bottom of the pan, and it's creating that flavor, that sweetness that you're looking for. That's what I'm doing here. So at a certain point, my onions are starting to get color. There's nothing I can do about it. That's how I'm like, okay, now I know, like, all of the water has boiled out of my onions. There's no more water in there, and they're starting to actually get a little bit of color. And I can either slow it down by adding water, or I can take the next step. The next step is tomato paste. Tomato paste is really, really strong flavored ingredient, and it's extremely important it's treated well. If you don't cook tomato paste enough, you will have a raw tomato flavor in your sauce forever. So what you want to do is you want to take your tomato paste and drop it in. I've got a tablespoon of tomato paste, and I'm going to cook it. I'm going to mix it and I'm going to cook it. And the tomato paste, at first it'll stick and it'll start to fry in the oil. And what I want is I want a really deep brick red color out of my tomato paste. That's when I know it's ready. And you can see the oil is getting stained bright red from the tomato. I am taking my time to make sure that that tomato paste cooks. This is the most important piece of the puzzle. Not rushing this step. If you look at the bottom of the pot, you can see that it's starting to get this brown frond on the bottom. That's all the sugars starting to stick. The tomato paste has gone from red to this like brick red. It's stained all the onions. All the oil is bright red. I could smell the tomato paste. It smells like frying tomato paste. Now I know it's time to add my tomatoes. Now, I only have these big cans of tomatoes because I'm a big restaurant, but obviously you wouldn't have that. And when I add my tomatoes, I got whole peeled tomatoes. I'm just going to go ahead and give them a mix. I'm going to bring it up to a simmer, and I'm going to let this simmer for probably, this will take about 35 minutes before it's done for this amount of sauce with this size pot. When the oil, it's no longer floating on the top, it starts to emulsify with the tomatoes. That's how you know that your sauce is done. When I'm looking at this, I'm saying, well, for the amount of sauce that we made, this sauce pot is really flat and wide, and therefore it cooked a little bit fast. I'm going to add a little bit of water so that it gives it some time to cook the tomatoes through. Once that water is cooked out and we're back to that same consistency again, this sauce is going to be done. It's going to be perfect. By putting the pot on halfway, A, you stop splattering sauce everywhere. B, you lose some of the steam and some of the water drips back down into the pot. Like you could see that water will drip off of a pot. That when the steam and it's dripping back down, and that's reincorporating some of the water, which is actually slowing down the evaporation process, which in turn is slowing down the cooking process, giving you more time to cook the tomatoes through. So I've got the pot just kind of half on. We've been cooking for probably about 45 minutes, so we're ready to give this guy a taste and see what we think, seasoning wise. You can see the oil and the tomatoes have kind of emulsified, come together. Wow. I think it's actually really delicious. And it needs a little bit more salt. I'm going to wait for that to dissolve and I'm really mix in before I taste it again. Just like the chili flakes, the salt needs to dissolve and get distributed before you taste it. And if you like your sauce nice and chunky, you could serve it just like this. If you prefer it a little smoother, you can give it a blend. I would take the bay leaf, the oregano stems right out of there, throw it in the blender. If you've got one of those emulsion blenders, you can give it a little blend. I love a chunky texture, especially if I'm going to be serving it over meatballs or over spaghetti, over pasta. It kind of has a beautiful texture. But if you prefer, you can blend it, and we definitely do a kind of in between at the restaurant. So we'll take half of it out and blend it, or we'll just kind of blend it halfway so it has some texture. But that's it. That's all it takes to make a really tasty sauce, and no more. I'm tickled pink, and you will be too with your sauce.